Good morning. I've one other notice. It's with great sadness that I say that this is Mark Brown's last Sunday officially as a member of staff of Mullafield Church. But he will be back on the first Sunday of September to we say a proper goodbye to him. But just put your hands together for Mark here this morning. So this morning we continue with our sermon series on Christian friendship, and our title this morning is When Christians Fall. Now, when Clive first gave me this title to preach from, I thought to myself, is he mad? What am I going to preach about in this here? Sure, Christians don't fall. This Christian walks a daddle. We say a wee prayer, give our life to Jesus, and then that's it. All our worries and problems are over. Isn't that right? We come into church on a Sunday morning then, and everyone's smiling, people are worshipping, hands in the air, and when you ask someone how they're doing, they'll tell you life is great. Unfortunately, though, this might be the picture that some people like to portray. It's not always the case, and the truth is that many Christians are struggling, and many Christians fail and fall. I've struggled many times over the 14 years from I get saved, and I'm not afraid to admit it. And thankfully, I have a good wife and good friends around me who have helped me through those struggles. But in the Bible, there are many examples of godly men and women who have struggled and failed. And this morning, I'm going to look at a couple of those stories with you and look at the reasons why they failed and how they get back on track again. So the first person I want us to look at this morning is King David. So if you've got your Bible with you this morning, turn to 2 Samuel 11, verses 1 to 5. In the spring of the year, when kings normally go to war, David sent Joab, the Israelite army, to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of bed and was walking on the roof of the palace. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. He sent someone out to find out who she was, and he was told she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to the palace, he slept with her. She had just completed the purification rites after having her menstrual period. Then she returned home. Later, when Bathsheba discovered that she was pregnant, she sent David a message saying, "I'm pregnant." So this is a story that you've heard preached about many times, but it's one that never fails to disturb me every time I read it. Because until this point, as you read through 1st and 2nd Samuel, you can't help but be impressed by David. He's a man of integrity, a man of honor, a brave warrior, and someone who God describes as a man after his own heart. But then you get to chapter 11, and he falls. And not just a small slip, but he falls big time. And as you read on in chapter 11, you will see how David tries to cover up the mess he's created, which ends up with him arranging the murder of Bathsheba's husband, Uriah the Hittite. So what leads to his fall, and what can we learn from it to stop us making the same mistakes? Well, verse 1 gives us a first clue. It reads, "In the time when kings normally go to war, David, a mighty warrior, decided to stay or send his men to do the fighting, and he stayed in the palace." David should have been with his men, but it appears that David has become too comfortable and lazy. He's lived in the fields as a shepherd, he's lived in tents as a soldier, and he slept in caves as a fugitive, and now he lives in a palace, and he thinks, why should I go and fight? Let the others do it, I'll sit back and enjoy the comforts. What he forgets that everything he owns is a blessing from God, who called him to be a mighty warrior, a king who is to lead his people, and not a stay-at-home king. Let me ask you a question this morning. Has your Christian walk become comfortable? Are you in a place where you think it's okay just to sit back and let others do the fighting? And when I say fighting, let us never forget that we are in a spiritual battle. And in Mullafield Church, our battle is to win the streets of East Belfast for the kingdom of God. Ask yourself this, as a Christian, when was the last time you stepped out of your comfort zone and challenged yourself? David's life became comfortable. He forgot what God had called him to do, which resulted in his walk with God becoming boring. And because of this, he became easy picking and he fell. The second thing we can learn about David's fall is in verse 2. It says, after his midday nap. Now, don't be panicking. There's nothing wrong with a midday nap. And I quite like one myself if I get the chance. But it says, after his midday nap, he walks on the palace roof and spots a beautiful woman having a bath. But instead of being a gentleman and looking away, David becomes a peeping Tom. Jesus gives us a warning about the eyes and what we look at. Matthew 6, verse 22 and 23, Jesus says, your eye is like a lamp, it provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. David was bored, and in his boredom, he starts to watch something that he shouldn't have been watching. Sound familiar? I spoke a couple of weeks back here about the addiction to pornography, which is becoming a huge problem right across the world. David went to the rooftop to watch a naked woman. But if he'd been living here today, all he would have to do was click on his phone or his laptop. And pornography is not the only problem. To fill boredom, people now spend hours watching box sets and films full of violence, horror, and sex on Netflix or whatever it is else, or whatever else is you subscribe to. Learn from David's fall and listen to the warning that Jesus has given us. When your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. After allowing the darkness to enter through his eyes, he inquires who this woman is. And even when he is told that she is married to one of his soldiers who is away fighting for Israel, he still sends his servants to fetch Bathsheba and he sleeps with her. See, David has become so powerful that he believes that he is untouchable. And unfortunately, over the past number of years, a number of megachurch leaders have fell into the same trap. There's so much we can learn from this story, which I don't have time to go into, but one thing that stands out to me from this story is I believe the main reason that David fell was because he had lost the one most important thing in his life, and that was his relationship with God. It's my belief when I read this that David is going through a dry patch. In the Psalms, he spends hours in prayer, crying out to God and worshipping him, and I believe if David was still in that place with his father, this would never have happened. If he had still been listening to God, he would have been with his soldiers and not relaxing in the palace. If he had spent the afternoon on his knees instead of laying in bed, he wouldn't have allowed his eyes to study this naked woman, and he wouldn't have allowed lust to overcome him. Here's an important lesson that I've learned over the years of my working in ministry. Whenever someone comes and tells me that they're struggling or they're falling, whenever I ask them, are they reading their Bible and spending time with God in prayer every day, 100% of the time they'll tell me no. And most of the time they'll tell me that they haven't done so in a long time. James 4 verse 7 says, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. We can only resist the devil if we submit to God in all our ways, and we need to be constantly seeking after God. If we do, he promises to draw near to us. If David, a man after God's own heart, can fall, anyone can fall. Thankfully, we have a good Father who picks us up and whenever we fall. And in David's case, he sends the prophet Nathan to help him get back on his feet. Nathan shows David the seriousness of his sins and warns him about the consequences that would follow as a result of the bad decisions he's made. There's always consequences for our sin and the bad decisions we make. So it's always important, no matter how mature you are in your faith, to have someone you can be accountable to and who will have permission to speak into your life. Thankfully, David confessed his guilt and repented, and God forgave him. And as you read on, you will see that his life and the lives of those he loved most will never be the same again. The next person I want to look at this morning is Peter. So let's go to Mark chapter 14, verses 53 to 54. It says, they took Jesus to the high priest's home, where the leading priests and elders and the teachers of religious law had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and went right into the high priest's courtyard. There he sat with the guards, warming himself by the fire. So these events take place immediately after Jesus' arrest. So we learn later on in chapter 14 how Peter, when challenged about being a friend of Jesus, denies 3 times that he knew Jesus, just as Jesus had predicted he would. Peter falls, and in verse 54, there are 2 important lessons that we can learn from that will help us from making the same mistakes. The first is we are told that Peter followed Jesus at a distance. Have you ever tried following Jesus at a distance? I can imagine it would be very difficult, but this is what many Christians try to do. They try to keep a foot in the world and a foot in the church. And they're always hanging about on the edge, never wanting to commit to anything. What happens to sheep on the edge? They're easy picking for wolves. And what happens to Christians on the edge? They're easy picking for the devil. The safest place to be is in the middle. Stay well connected to your church. So many Christians haven't come back to church because they're still watching online. Go to your life groups. When the programs start back in September, for the men, go to the men's group on a Monday and Thursday night. The women go to the women's group on a Monday night. Get involved in all the opportunities you get. Get to the prayer meetings. And remember this warning. People who stand too close to the edge have a greater risk of falling. The second lesson we can learn from Peter is in the last line of verse 14 where it says, he sat with the guards by the fire. He followed Jesus from a distance and he sat with the guards. He sat with the enemies of Jesus. And what happens when you hang out with the wrong people? You fall. So many times I see people give their lives to Jesus, start coming to church on a Sunday, do great for a while, but then they fall away because they continue to surround themselves with the wrong people. If you surround yourself with people who are taking drugs, drinking heavily, or getting involved in the wrong sort of thing, the chances are you will fall. It's the same with your circle of friends are negative, jealous, small-minded, and gossips. The chances are you'll fall. The more time you spend with someone, the more you become like them. And the more time you spend with Jesus, the more you become like him. The biggest problem for new Christians is that most of the time their family and friends will not be saved, and it can be very difficult for them. One young man who came to Willowfield for a while, and he was really struggling because his family and friends and the people in work were all giving him a hard time about becoming a Christian. He was a life and soul of the party, and they didn't like the person he was becoming. He left here and he went to another church, and I was speaking to him a few weeks back on the 1st of July, and very sadly, he was telling me that he had fallen away. I'm going to be honest and say that as a church family, we are not always great at coming alongside new Christians and supporting them, and it's something that we need to get better at. We need to be more aware of the fact that many people giving their lives to Christ can also involve them walking away from their circle of friends, which can result in them being lonely and isolated. I've shared here before about a time when I wasn't long saved, and I was sitting just down there one Sunday night, and the church was packed, and I was surrounded with people, but I felt lonely, and I felt lost. And I remember thinking, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. And then even scarier thought came to me that I didn't belong out there either. But thankfully a number of mature Christians here came alongside me, encouraged and prayed for me in my walk. But that's not always the case. When a baby has learned to walk, it will continually fall. And when it does, the parents will just constantly, time and time again, pick it up until it develops the strength and confidence so it can stand and walk on its own without any help. And that's what we need to do with baby Christians. Peter failed, but thankfully he learned from his mistakes, picked himself back up again, ran back to the risen Christ, as we see from the story in John when he's in the fishing boat and Jesus is on the beach. Peter jumps out of the boat and he runs to Jesus. And this uneducated fisherman ended up becoming one of the first leaders of the early church. If you're a member of Willowfield, can I encourage you to always be aware of the people sitting around you? Be on the lookout for newcomers. Get to know new people, and let's be better at encouraging and supporting each other. As people outside looking into the church, should it be Willowfield, Ravenhill, CFC, Orangefield, it doesn't matter. People looking in should see something different. They should see something that's attractive. They should see a community. They should see a family. They should see love. As we come to the end this morning, let's make sure we learn from the lessons we have spoken about. Stay close to Jesus and don't follow at a distance. Surround yourself with good, godly people. Support one another. Watch out for people who might be struggling. If a close friend falls into sin, don't be afraid to challenge them. And when someone falls, pick them up and help them get back on their feet. I'll just finish with these words from Jesus, taken from John 13, verses 34 and 35. Jesus says, "So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. And your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." Amen.